The Rudolph Fentz File. On a humid June night in 1950, the neon pulse of Times Square bathed Midtown Manhattan in electric blue and red. Pedestrians flooded the crosswalks. Taxicabs crawled bumper to bumper through the most congested intersection in the Western Hemisphere. At precisely 11:15 p.m., a man materialized in the center of it all, standing frozen between lanes of oncoming traffic as though dropped from the sky. He did not belong there. A tall silk top hat sat rigid on his head. A cutaway coat, buttoned tight to the throat, wrapped his torso in a style abandoned before the turn of the century. High-lace leather shoes, polished but ancient in design, planted themselves on asphalt he seemed never to have touched before. Thick mutton chop sideburns framed a face locked in absolute terror. Witnesses said he stared upward at the steel towers surrounding him, mouth open, body trembling, as if the buildings themselves were falling. He crouched. He shielded his head with both arms. Then he lurched forward, directly into the path of an oncoming cab. The driver never had time to brake. Rudolph Fentz was dead before the ambulance arrived. When police emptied his pockets at the morgue, the investigation took a turn no one anticipated. $70 in old banknotes, pulled from his inner coat pocket, had not been printed in over 50 years. Yet the paper showed zero deterioration, no creases, no discoloration. A copper token, redeemable for a 5-cent beer, bore the name of a saloon that appeared in no city directory and no living officer had ever heard of. A bill from a livery stable on Lexington Avenue itemized the feeding and stabling of one horse. But the stable itself had been demolished decades before anyone in the precinct was born. A letter, postmarked Philadelphia, June 1876, was addressed to Rudolph Fentz at a Fifth Avenue residence. The envelope was sealed. The ink was sharp. Every object in this dead man's possession looked as though it had been placed there hours ago, yet pointed to a world that had ceased to exist 3/4 of a century earlier. Captain Hubert Viffy, Ream of the NYPD Missing Persons Bureau, opened a formal investigation. He ran the name through every active directory in the 5 boroughs. Nothing. The Fifth Avenue address led to a commercial storefront whose tenants had never encountered the name Fentz. Fingerprint databases returned no match. No employer, no hospital, no draft record, no tax filing connected to a living or recently deceased Rudolph Fentz existed anywhere in the system. Ream widened his search to older records. Deep in a discontinued phone directory, he located one entry for a Rudolph Fentz Jr., a retired man who had died 5 years prior. His widow, now living in Florida, responded to Reim's letter with information that turned the case inside out. Her father-in-law, she confirmed, was named Rudolph Fentz. He had disappeared in 1876 at the age of 29 after leaving his home for an evening walk. He never came back. No body was recovered. No explanation was ever offered. When Ream cross-referenced the 1876 missing persons file, every detail matched the man in the morgue, the clothing, the age, the address. Ream sealed the case. He classified it as unsolved. He never spoke of it publicly. The story drifted through paranormal journals and conspiracy archives for decades, cited as the strongest evidence of involuntary time displacement ever documented. Then, in 2000, folklorist Chris Albeck traced the entire narrative to a 1951 science fiction short story by Jack Finney titled I'm Scared. The case of Rudolph Fentz, it appeared, was literary invention. The file should have closed permanently. But in 2007, a researcher at the Berlin News Archive reported discovering a newspaper clipping about the Fentz incident dated April 1951, predating Finney's published story by several months. If authentic, the timeline reverses. The fiction becomes the record becomes the cover. Did Jack Finney create Rudolph Fentz? Or did someone ensure a real event was buried inside a story no one would ever take seriously? The man from Taured. In the summer of 1954, a well-dressed Caucasian man stepped off a routine European flight and entered the arrivals hall at Haneda Airport in Tokyo. He carried a leather briefcase, wore a tailored suit, and moved through the terminal with the calm confidence of a seasoned international traveler. He joined the immigration queue like everyone else. He handed over his passport without hesitation, and that was the moment everything fractured. The passport was not forged. It bore official stamps from multiple countries across Europe and Asia, consistent with years of frequent travel. The paper quality, the binding, the ink, all matched the standards of a legitimate government-issued document. But the nation printed on the cover did not exist. The country was called Taured. Immigration officers examined the document repeatedly. They asked the man to clarify his nationality. He responded calmly and without confusion. He pointed to the map on the wall and placed his finger on the small territory wedged between France and Spain, the area the rest of the world recognized as the Principality of Andorra. He insisted Taured had occupied that exact location for over 1,000 years. He expressed genuine bewilderment that the officers had never heard of it. He produced a driver's license issued by Taured, a checkbook drawn on a bank in Taured, business cards from a company allegedly headquartered in Taured. Every document in his possession reinforced the same impossible claim. Customs officials contacted the company listed on his business cards. The company existed, but had no record of the man. They contacted the hotel where he claimed to have a reservation. The hotel confirmed the booking, but under a name linked to no known passport authority. The bank listed on his checks operated in multiple countries, yet none of its branches could verify an account under his name or the jurisdiction of Taured. Every thread led somewhere real, but connected to nothing verifiable. The officers detained the man for further questioning. He was cooperative, articulate, and visibly frustrated. He spoke multiple languages fluently. He answered every question with precise detail. He described the history of Taured, its government structure, its chief exports, its relationship with neighboring nations. None of it corresponded to any known geopolitical record. He was not delusional. He was not evasive. He was simply describing a country that, by every available map on Earth, did not exist and had never existed. Airport security transferred him to a nearby hotel for overnight holding. 2 immigration guards were stationed directly outside his door. The room was on an upper floor with no balcony, no fire escape, and a single window that did not open wide enough for a human body to pass through. His passport and all personal documents were confiscated and locked inside the airport's secure evidence room. By morning, both guards confirmed they had remained at their posts through the entire night. No one entered, no one exited. But when officials unlocked the door, the room was empty. The bed had been slept in. The bathroom was undisturbed. The man from Taured was gone. When security rushed to the evidence room to retrieve his passport, the file was empty. Every document, the passport, the driver's license, the checkbook, the business cards, had vanished. No airport camera recorded his departure. No taxi service logged a pickup. No airline manifested his name on any outbound flight. Japanese immigration authorities conducted a full internal review. They found no procedural breach. They found no explanation. No record of the man from Taured has surfaced in any government archive since 1954. No intelligence agency has claimed involvement. No nation matching the description of Taured has appeared on any map before or after the incident. A man walked into one of the most surveilled airports in Asia, carrying documents from a country that never existed, answered every question with total coherence, and then disappeared from a locked room under armed guard without leaving a single trace. If he was not from this world's version of history, then whose version was he from? The John Titor transmissions. On November 2, 2000, a user operating under the handle Time-Travel_0 logged into a public internet forum and posted a message that would ignite one of the longest-running mysteries in the history of the digital age. The message was calm, methodical, and written with the precision of a military briefing. The user claimed to be a soldier from the year 2036, stationed temporarily in the year 2000 as part of a government-sanctioned time travel operation. His mission was specific. He had been sent back to 1975 to retrieve an IBM 5100 portable computer. His name, he said, was John Titor. Over the next 4 months, Titor posted hundreds of messages across multiple forums. He described the mechanics of his time machine in extraordinary technical detail, identifying it as a stationary mass temporal displacement unit installed in the rear of a 1967 Chevrolet Corvette, later transferred to a 1987 four-wheel drive truck for practicality. He provided hand-drawn schematics of the device, complete with labeled components including dual microsingularities, an electron injection manifold, and a cesium timing system. He described the physics behind controlled gravitational distortion and its effect on localized world lines. The language was dense, specific, and internally consistent across every post. But the detail that separated Titor from every other internet hoax was the IBM 5100. Titor stated that the IBM 5100 possessed a hidden built-in function capable of translating between legacy programming languages, specifically APL and BASIC, and that this function had been deliberately concealed by IBM from the public. He claimed the military in 2036 needed this capability to debug aging mainframe systems threatened by a cascading software crisis. At the time Titor made these statements, no publicly available documentation confirmed this feature. The IBM 5100 was an obscure discontinued machine from 1975, and virtually no one outside of a small circle of original IBM engineers had any reason to know its architecture at that level. Yet within years, Bob Dubke, one of the lead engineers on the IBM 5100 project, publicly confirmed that the machine did in fact contain an undocumented emulation function, allowing it to translate between those exact languages. The feature had been intentionally suppressed from marketing materials at IBM's request. No one could explain how a random internet user in the year 2000 had access to this information. Titor also issued a series of predictions about future events. He described a second American Civil War beginning in 2004, a nuclear exchange with Russia in 2015, and the fracturing of the United States into 5 autonomous regions. None of these events occurred. Titor himself had anticipated this discrepancy, explaining that his model of time travel operated on a divergent world line theory, meaning each act of travel created a separate timeline, branching approximately 2% from the original. The future he described was not necessarily this timeline's future, it was his. In March 2001, John Titor posted his final message. He announced his departure and thanked the community for their engagement. Then the account went silent, permanently. Subsequent investigations traced the IP addresses associated with the posts to the Florida residence of entertainment lawyer Larry Haber, whose brother had previously expressed interest in time travel concepts. Haber filed a copyright claim over certain Titor-related materials through a corporation he controlled, fueling suspicion that the entire operation was an elaborate intellectual property scheme. Yet, Haber never publicly admitted authorship. No one else has claimed responsibility. And the IBM 5100 revelation has never been adequately explained within the framework of a simple hoax. A classified hardware function, buried for 25 years inside a discontinued machine, surfaced on a public internet forum from a man who said he had not been born yet. If Titor was a fraud, where did the knowledge come from? And if the answer is nowhere, then when did it come from? The Andrew Carlssin arrest. In January 2003, the Enforcement Division of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission flagged an account that defied every known pattern of market behavior. A single trader, operating with an initial investment of $800, had executed 126 consecutive high-risk stock trades over a period of 2 weeks. Every single trade was profitable, not one loss, not one hedge, not one correction. The account balance at the time of seizure stood at approximately $350 million. The statistical probability of that sequence occurring by chance, skill, or insider access was, by the SEC's own internal assessment, functionally zero. The trader's name was Andrew Carlssin. He was arrested in New York on suspicion of insider trading. During interrogation, Carlssin did not behave like a man caught in a financial crime. He did not request an attorney. He did not invoke his right to silence. He did not offer the name of a source, a partner, or a network. Instead, he made a statement that the agents in the room were wholly unprepared for. He claimed to be a time traveler from the year 2256. He stated that he had journeyed back to the early 21st century with the specific intention of using his knowledge of future market movements to accumulate capital. He described the current financial era as a period of particular vulnerability, ideal for short-term extraction, because regulatory technology had not yet evolved to detect temporal interference. He offered a deal. In exchange for his release and a guarantee of immunity, he would provide the exact location of Osama bin Laden, then the most wanted fugitive on Earth. He would disclose the cure for AIDS, He would reveal the date and method of several future events that had not yet occurred. The agents declined. They charged him with securities fraud and detained him pending trial. What happened next disturbed the investigators more than the interrogation itself. A background check on Andrew Carlssin returned nothing. No social security number, no tax history, no birth certificate, no driver's license, no prior address, no employment record, no passport, no immigration file. The name existed in no government database at any level, federal, state, or municipal. There was no record that Andrew Carlssin had ever existed in the United States or anywhere else on Earth before the moment he opened that brokerage account. An unidentified individual posted his bail. The amount was not disclosed. The identity of the guarantor was never confirmed by the court. Carlssin was released pending a hearing date. He did not appear. No forwarding address was recovered. No airline, bus company, or rental agency had any transaction under his name. The SEC issued a warrant, but the trail was already cold. Andrew Carlssin had vanished from the system as cleanly as he had entered it. The story was first reported by Yahoo Finance and subsequently picked up by several major news outlets. Within weeks, the narrative was traced back to a March 2003 article in Weekly World News, a tabloid known for publishing satirical and fictional content. The SEC declined to confirm or deny the existence of the case. No official statement has ever been released acknowledging or refuting the arrest, the interrogation, or the disappearance. The original Yahoo Finance article was quietly removed from its archive. The standard explanation is that the entire episode was fabricated, a tabloid invention amplified by viral repetition in the early days of the Internet. That explanation requires accepting that a detailed account of an SEC arrest, complete with specific trade figures, legal proceedings, and bail conditions, was invented from nothing by a publication that typically ran stories about alien sightings, and that no financial regulatory body ever bothered to publicly correct the record. A man with no past turned $800 into $350 million, offered the location of the most hunted man alive, and then disappeared without a trace. The SEC will not say he existed, but the SEC has never said he did not. If Andrew Carlssin was fiction, someone went to extraordinary lengths to make the fiction behave exactly like a cover-up. The Moberly-Jourdain Incident. On the afternoon of August 10, 1901, two British women walked into the gardens of the Palace of Versailles and, by their own account, walked out of the 20th century entirely. Charlotte Ann Moberly was 55 years old, the principal of St. Hugh's Hall at Oxford University. Eleanor Jourdain was 38, an Oxford-educated scholar who would later become her deputy. They were not occultists. They were not sensation seekers. They were two of the most respected female academics in Edwardian England, visiting Paris to become better acquainted before a professional appointment. What they described that afternoon would shadow both their reputations for the rest of their lives. The two women had toured the main palace and found it unremarkable. They decided to walk through the gardens toward the Petit Trianon, the small neoclassical chateau built for Louis XV and later gifted to Marie Antoinette. Using a Baedeker guidebook, they took a wrong turn and wandered off the main avenue into an unfamiliar lane. That was when the atmosphere changed. Both women independently reported a sudden heaviness in the air, a sensation Moberly described as oppression and dreariness, so unnatural that the trees themselves appeared flat and lifeless, like figures worked in tapestry. The light shifted, the silence deepened. The gardens around them no longer felt like a public tourist attraction. They felt sealed. Along the path, they encountered figures that did not belong to 1901. Two men dressed in long, grayish-green coats and small, three-cornered hats stood near a wheelbarrow. Jourdain saw an old cottage with a woman and a girl standing at the doorway, both unnaturally still, like wax figures. A man sitting near a garden kiosk turned toward them, and both women recoiled. Moberly described his face as dark, rough, and repulsive. Jourdain noted his complexion was scarred by smallpox, and his expression was evil and unseeing. A gentleman with a broad hat and dark cloak suddenly appeared behind them and urged them in a strange accent to move in a different direction. They obeyed without question. At the terrace of the Petit Trianon, Moberly noticed a woman sitting alone on the grass, sketching. She wore a light summer dress, a white fichu draped over her shoulders, and a pale straw hat. Her presence seemed disconnected from the surroundings. Jourdain did not see her, but later reported sensing someone nearby. When they entered the building, the atmosphere abruptly normalized. The weight lifted, the silence broke. The 20th century returned. Neither woman mentioned the experience to the other for a full week. It was only when Moberly, while writing a letter to her sister, asked Jourdain whether she thought the Petit Trianon might be haunted that the conversation began. Jourdain said yes immediately. 3 months later, back in Oxford, they wrote independent accounts and began cross-referencing historical records. What they found disturbed them profoundly. The man with the pockmarked face matched physical descriptions of the Comte de Vaudreuil, a Creole courtier dead since 1817. The woman sketching on the terrace matched known depictions of Marie Antoinette. The clothing Moberly described on the sketching woman, a green silk bodice, white fichu, and slightly yellowed skirt, was later confirmed through the private journal of Madame Eloff, the Queen's personal dressmaker, a document that had not been published or translated into English at the time of their visit. They published their account in 1911 under the title An Adventure, using pseudonyms. The book caused a sensation and drew immediate ridicule from the academic establishment. Skeptics proposed shared delusion, fatigue, or a misidentified costume party hosted by the nearby resident Comte de Montesquieu. Yet neither woman retracted a single detail. Their original manuscripts, notes, and correspondence were donated to the Bodleian Library at Oxford, where they remain archived to this day. 2 Oxford scholars described architecture, clothing, and historical figures they had no documented means of knowing. The details they recorded matched unpublished records that would not surface for years. If their minds invented the experience, how did their invention contain information that had not yet been made available to the living? The Goddard time slip. In the early months of 1935, Wing Commander Victor Goddard of the Royal Air Force was ordered to fly a routine inspection mission from Andover, England to Edinburgh, Scotland. Goddard was not a mystic. He was not a theorist. He was a decorated military officer with years of operational flight experience, a man trained to observe, assess, and report with precision. His aircraft was a Hawker Hart biplane, standard RAF issue, reliable in clear weather, but vulnerable to turbulence. The mission was unremarkable in every respect. What happened during the return flight would remain unexplained for the rest of his life. On the outward leg of the journey, Goddard diverted over Drem Airfield in East Lothian, Scotland. The base had been constructed during the First World War, but had long since been decommissioned. From the cockpit, Goddard observed exactly what he expected. The hangars were dilapidated. The tarmac was cracked and overgrown with grass. Cattle grazed freely across what had once been the main runway. Drem was a ruin, a dead installation slowly being consumed by the Scottish countryside. Goddard noted the condition and continued on to Edinburgh without incident. On the return flight to Andover, Goddard took the same route. As he approached the area near Drem, the sky changed without warning. A violent storm materialized from what had been clear conditions. The clouds turned an unnatural shade of brownish yellow, a color Goddard had never encountered in years of military aviation. Rain lashed the open cockpit. Winds threw the Hawker Hart into a steep, uncontrolled descent. The altimeter spun. Goddard fought the stick with both hands, unable to stabilize the aircraft. The biplane dropped toward the terrain below, and for a moment, the wing commander was certain he was going to crash into the hills surrounding Drem. Then the storm vanished. In a single instant, the turbulence stopped. The rain ceased. Brilliant golden sunlight flooded the cockpit. The clouds were gone, and directly below him, Drem Airfield was no longer a ruin. The hangars stood intact, freshly painted, gleaming in the light. The tarmac was clean and operational. 4 aircraft sat parked on the runway in neat formation. 3 were biplanes, familiar to Goddard. But the 4th was something he had never seen before, a monoplane of a design that did not exist anywhere in the Royal Air Force inventory in 1935. All 4 aircraft were painted bright yellow. The RAF did not paint its planes yellow. Mechanics moved purposefully between the machines on the ground. Their overalls were blue. RAF ground crew in 1935 wore brown. Every detail Goddard observed contradicted the present. The airfield below him was functioning at full capacity, staffed and equipped in ways that did not correspond to any active British military installation he knew of. Goddard passed over the airfield at low altitude. None of the mechanics looked up. None of the personnel on the ground reacted to his presence. It was as though the biplane passing directly overhead did not exist in their version of the sky. Seconds later, the golden light disappeared. The brownish clouds swallowed the aircraft again. Turbulence returned. Goddard climbed hard, regained altitude, and flew the remaining distance to Andover in shaken silence. He reported the experience privately, but did not publicize it. He had no explanation. He filed no formal claim of paranormal activity. He simply recorded what he had observed and moved on with his career. 4 years later, in 1939, the Royal Air Force reactivated Drem Airfield as part of Britain's military expansion ahead of the Second World War. Training aircraft were repainted in a new standardized color. The color was yellow. A new monoplane entered service across multiple RAF stations. It was the Miles Magister, a low-wing trainer, unlike anything in the 1935 fleet. Ground crew uniforms were updated from brown overalls to blue. Every detail Goddard had described in 1935, the yellow planes, the unknown monoplane, the blue overalls, the operational airfield, materialized exactly as he had witnessed them, 4 years after he saw them from the cockpit of a biplane that should not have been able to see the future. Goddard never profited from the story. He never built a public persona around the claim. He discussed it sparingly and treated it as an anomaly rather than proof of anything. He rose to the rank of air marshal and served with distinction through the war. A military officer trained to report only what he observed described an airfield that did not yet exist, in colors that had not yet been chosen, with aircraft that had not yet been designed. If Goddard saw the future, who else has seen it and been instructed never to speak? The Bold Street time slips. Bold Street is a narrow shopping road in the heart of Liverpool, England. It runs from the Lyceum, a 19th-century neoclassical building at its northern entrance, down to Central Station at its southern end. Independent cafes, vintage shops, and bookstores line both sides. On any given afternoon, it looks like 1,000 other high streets across Britain. But since 1996, a pattern of incidents has emerged from this single stretch of pavement that no investigation has been able to explain. Multiple witnesses, unconnected to each other, spanning different years, have reported the same phenomenon. They walked into Bold Street in the present and, for a brief, disorienting moment, stepped into the past. The earliest documented account came from a man named Frank, a retired police officer from Merseyside. On a Saturday afternoon in 1996, Frank and his wife Carol were shopping in Liverpool city centre. Carol wanted to visit a bookshop on Bold Street. They agreed to split up. Frank stopped to speak with an old friend, and Carol walked ahead alone. When Frank finished his conversation and turned into Bold Street from the Lyceum entrance, something shifted. The street went quiet. The ambient noise of modern traffic, music from storefronts, pedestrian chatter, all dropped away. A small box van swerved past him, narrowly missing his shoulder. Painted on its side was the name Carlssin. Frank did not recognize the brand. The road surface beneath his feet looked different. The shop fronts had changed. Where the bookshop should have stood, a sign above the door read, "Crips." A young woman in clothing that did not match the current decade walked past him and entered the store. Frank followed her inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, the interior was the bookshop again. The woman standing beside him looked around, confused, shook her head, and said that was strange. She had thought it was a clothing shop. Then she walked away. Frank, a man who had spent his career dealing in evidence and procedure, later confirmed through historical records that Crips had been a women's clothing shop on that exact location decades earlier. Carlssin was a Liverpool delivery company that had ceased operations long before 1996. Frank had never heard of either name prior to the incident. 10 years later, in 2006, a 19-year-old named Sean reported an eerily similar experience. Sean had been shoplifting in the area when a security guard spotted him and gave chase. He ran down Hanover Street and ducked into a dead-end alley called Brooks Alley to hide. As he stood catching his breath, a tightness gripped his chest. The air pressure seemed to change. When he stepped back out onto the street, the guard was gone. But so was everything else he recognized. The road surface was different. The cars moving past him were old, rounded models he had never seen outside of films. Roadworks he knew had been in progress were absent. People on the pavement wore clothing from another era. He crossed a bold street and noticed traffic lights where none currently existed. At a newspaper kiosk, he glimpsed the front page of the Liverpool Daily Post. The date printed on the paper was Thursday, May 18th, 1967. Moments later, the sensation broke. The tightness lifted. The modern street returned. Sean was standing on the same pavement in 2006 with his heart pounding. Sean told his story to the Liverpool Echo. The newspaper verified that the specific details he described, the road layout, the position of traffic lights, the Daily Post edition, were consistent with Liverpool as it existed in 1967. Sean had no prior knowledge of the city's mid-century geography. He had not studied local history. He was 19 years old and had been running from a security guard. Other witnesses have since come forward with accounts from the same street. A university student named Jane reported her mobile phone call cutting dead halfway down Bold Street in the mid-2000s before finding herself surrounded by oil lamps and vintage storefronts for approximately 60 seconds. A woman named Imogen described a similar displacement near the Lyceum entrance. In each case, the experience lasted less than 2 minutes. In each case, the witness described the same atmospheric shift, a sudden silence, a change in pressure, and a visual environment consistent with Liverpool between the 1950s and 1960s. In 2010, construction workers renovating the cellar beneath one of Bold Street's shops discovered handwritten messages on the basement walls. One, dated February 1966, read, "God have mercy on all who enter here." Another, written 3 years later, simply confirmed the first. It said, "It's no joke." An entire street in one of England's largest cities has produced multiple independent accounts of involuntary time displacement across a span of more than a decade. The witnesses include a police officer, a teenager, and a university student. None of them knew each other. If Bold Street is a door, who opened it, and has anyone ever failed to come back through? The Chaplin time traveler. In October 2010, an Irish filmmaker named George Clark was reviewing bonus material on a DVD box set of Charlie Chaplin's collected works. Clark was a Chaplin enthusiast and an independent director based in Belfast, the kind of viewer who studied background extras and crowd movements the way most people watched lead actors. He was scrolling through a featurette titled The Hollywood Premiere, included on the disc for Chaplin's 1928 film, The Circus, when he noticed something in the footage that made him rewind the clip 6 times before he accepted what he was seeing. The footage was shot outside Grauman's Chinese Theater on the night of the film's premiere, black and white, grainy and silent. A crowd of attendees moves along the sidewalk. A heavyset figure enters the frame from the left, walking slowly past the entrance. The figure appears to be a woman in her 60s or 70s, dressed in a long, dark coat and a black hat pulled low. Her left hand is raised to the side of her face, fingers curled around a thin, flat, dark object, pressed firmly against her ear. Her lips are moving. She is not looking at anyone around her. She is not gesturing to a companion. She is holding a device to her ear and speaking into it, exactly the way a person in the 21st century would use a mobile phone in 1928. Clark uploaded the clip to YouTube under the title Chaplin's Time Traveler. Within 1 week, the video had been viewed over 1.5 million times. Within a month, it had been covered by CNN, ABC News, Fox News, the Daily Mail, and dozens of international outlets spanning Russia, China, Taiwan, and Vietnam. Frame-by-frame analysis was conducted by thousands of viewers. The object in the woman's hand was not a purse. It was not a glove. It was not her bare hand cupping her ear. It was a distinct, separate rectangular object, held in a position that served no practical function in 1928 unless it was a communication device. The most widely accepted alternative explanation pointed to early portable hearing aids. In 1924, Siemens had introduced a compact carbon amplifier model that could be held to the ear. Philip Skroska, an archivist at the Bernard Becker Medical Library at Washington University, proposed the device could be an ear trumpet, a mechanical hearing aid that had been in production since the 19th century and was still used in compact rectangular forms through the 1920s. The explanation was plausible, Hearing aids existed. People held them to their ears, Case explained, except for one detail that no hearing aid theory has resolved. The woman's lips are visibly moving throughout the entire sequence. She is not adjusting a device. She is not wincing in discomfort. She is forming words. Her mouth opens and closes in a rhythmic, conversational pattern consistent with speech directed at a listener. Ear trumpets amplify incoming sound. They do not transmit. There is no reason to speak into a hearing aid. There is no one beside her to speak to. She is walking alone, holding a thin black object to her ear and talking. In footage captured 45 years before Motorola demonstrated the first cellular telephone prototype in 1973. Clark himself made no definitive claim. He stated publicly that the only conclusion he could reach sounded absolutely ridiculous. He asked viewers to examine the footage and draw their own conclusions. He did not monetize the video. He did not launch a campaign. He simply showed the world 6 seconds of archival film and asked a question that has never received a complete answer. The footage is authentic. The DVD is commercially available. The premiere of the circus took place on January 6, 1928, and the supplementary material was sourced from original newsreel archives held by the Chaplin estate. No evidence of digital manipulation has been identified in the clip. The woman has never been identified. 6 seconds of film, one unidentified figure, a device that should not exist for another half-century, and a mouth forming words that no one on Earth in 1928 could have heard on the other end. If she was not speaking to someone, then what was she doing? And if she was, then who was listening? The Time-Traveling Hipster. In 1941, a photographer stood on the banks of the Bridge River in Gold Bridge, British Columbia, and captured a single black and white image of the crowd gathered for the reopening of the South Fork Bridge. The bridge had been washed out during a flood the previous year, and its restoration was a modest local event, the kind of occasion that drew farmers, miners, and their families from the surrounding communities. The photograph showed exactly what anyone would expect from small-town Canada in the early 1940s. Men in fedora hats and wool overcoats, women in long skirts and buttoned blouses. Everyone dressed in the formal, conservative style of the wartime era. Everyone except one man. Standing just right of center in the frame, surrounded by dozens of traditionally dressed attendees, was a young man who looked as though he had stepped out of a completely different decade. He wore dark wraparound sunglasses with side shields, a style associated with modern sports eyewear. His shirt appeared to be a graphic printed tee with a large logo on the chest, a garment that would not become mainstream for another 30 years. Around his neck hung a compact, portable camera, far smaller than the bulky model standard in 1941. His hair was styled casually, swept to one side. His posture was relaxed. He was not dressed for a community bridge dedication in wartime British Columbia. He was dressed for a Saturday afternoon in 1995. The photograph remained in the collection of the Bras-Lorne Pioneer Museum for over 60 years without attracting attention. In 2004, it was included in a local exhibit titled Their Past Lives Here. In 2010, when the museum digitized its archive and uploaded the collection to the Virtual Museum of Canada, the image detonated across the internet. Forums, blogs, and social media platforms circulated the photograph under a single label that stuck immediately: the Time-Traveling Hipster. Within weeks, a second photograph surfaced. It belonged to the John Weeksney collection and was captioned, "Opening of the New Bridge at South Fork, 1941. Taken from a different angle at the same event, the image clearly showed the same young man standing in the same position among the same crowd. The second photograph eliminated the most immediate objection. This was not a digital manipulation. The man was physically present at the event. He had been captured on film by 2 separate photographers from 2 separate vantage points on the same day. Skeptics moved quickly to dismantle the anomaly. Snopes published a detailed analysis arguing that every item the man wore or carried was technically available in 1941. Wraparound sunglasses with protective side shields had existed since the 1920s, originally designed for industrial and glacial use. The shirt was likely not a printed tee, but a knitted sweater bearing a sewn-on emblem, possibly the logo of the Montreal Maroons, a National Hockey League team that had folded in 1938. Kodak had manufactured portable cameras of comparable size since at least 1938. Individually, Each item could be explained. The sunglasses were uncommon, but not impossible. The sweater was unusual, but not anachronistic. The camera was compact, but not non-existent. But the objection was never about any single item. It was about the totality. Every element of this man's appearance, his eyewear, his shirt, his camera, his hairstyle, his relaxed posture, converged into a visual profile that did not match a single other person in the frame. Dozens of attendees were captured in both photographs. Every one of them conformed to the aesthetic norms of 1941. One man did not. The statistical likelihood of a single individual independently selecting every available deviation from the dominant style of his era and combining them into a coherent modern silhouette is not impossible, but it is, by any measure, extraordinary. The Canadian Heritage Information Network published a formal case study on the image in 2011, analyzing its viral trajectory and the museum's role in unintentional global mythology. The study confirmed the photograph's authenticity, but offered no conclusion about the man's identity. He has never been named. No descendant has come forward. No local historian has matched him to any resident of the Bridge River Valley. A man stood in a crowd in 1941, dressed in a way no one around him was dressed, carrying technology no one around him was carrying, and was recorded by 2 independent cameras. His name is unknown, his origin is unverified, his presence has never been explained. If every item he wore existed in 1941, why was he the only person in British Columbia who chose to wear them all at once? The Jophar Vorin mystery. In the final weeks of 1850, a stranger was found wandering the outskirts of a small village in the district of Lebas near Frankfurt an der Oder in eastern Germany. He was disoriented, exhausted, and visibly distressed. His appearance was Caucasian. His clothing, while worn from travel, did not correspond to any recognizable European fashion. He spoke German, but poorly, with a thick accent that no local linguist could place to any known region of the continent. When the village authorities brought him in for questioning, he gave his name as Jophar Vorin. Everything he said after that made the interrogation one of the strangest official proceedings in 19th century European records. Vorin stated that he had come from a country called Laxaria, located on a continent named Sakria. He described Sakria as being separated from Europe by vast oceans. He was emphatic. He was coherent. He drew no maps that matched any known cartography. When shown a globe, he could not identify his homeland on it. He did not recognize Africa, Asia, or the Americas by their accepted names. Instead, he referred to the 5 continents of the earth as Sakria, Aflar, Astar, Auslar, and Uplar. 5 landmasses, 5 names. None of them corresponded to any language, any atlas, or any geographic framework in use anywhere on the planet in 1850, or at any point in recorded history before it. Vorin claimed his religion was Christian in form and doctrine, but called it Ispatian, a denomination unknown to every theologian consulted during the investigation. He stated that his purpose in traveling to Europe was to locate a long-lost brother who had been sent as an explorer to what Vorin described as the New World, gesturing toward Europe on the map as though the continent were a distant frontier, not the seat of global civilization. He said he had suffered a shipwreck during the voyage, but could not identify where the wreck had occurred or trace any portion of his route on any available chart. The most unsettling element of the case was not what Vorin said. It was what he could write. In addition to his broken German, Vorin demonstrated fluency in 2 languages he identified as Laxarian and Abramian. Laxarian, he explained, was the common tongue of his people. Abramian was the liturgical language of the Ispatian clergy. He wrote extensive samples of both before the authorities. The scripts were internally consistent, structurally organized, and displayed characteristics of developed written languages, distinct alphabets, grammatical patterns, and what appeared to be systematic punctuation. No linguist in Frankfurt could connect either script to any known language family, living or dead. They were not ciphers. They were not corruptions of existing alphabets. They appeared to be complete, functional writing systems from a civilization that no one in the room had ever encountered. The scholars of Frankfurt an der Oder examined Vorin over a period of weeks. They consulted with academics from neighboring institutions. Their conclusion, documented in multiple European and American newspaper reports published in the spring of 1851, was unanimous. The man was not insane. His story, however impossible, was internally consistent and delivered with a sincerity that none of the examiners could dismiss. The authorities decided to transfer him to Berlin for further scientific study. He never arrived. During the journey, under the escort of Inspector Liebeuf, Vorin was seized by what witnesses described as a hysterical fit. He threw himself from the moving carriage and fled into the surrounding woods. A search party was dispatched immediately. They combed the forest for days. No trace of Jophar Vorin was found. No footprints, no discarded clothing, no body. He had vanished as completely and as inexplicably as he had appeared. Inspector Liebeuf filed a brief note in his report that was preserved in the public record. He wrote that the man may have been a being from another world and suggested that he had simply returned to wherever he had come from. No subsequent investigation has identified Jophar Vorin in any immigration record, any hospital ledger, any prison registry, or any death certificate in any European nation. The newspaper accounts from 1851 remain the only documentation of his existence. The languages he wrote have never been decoded. The continents he named have never been found. A man appeared in Germany speaking languages no one recognized, describing a world no atlas has ever contained, and then disappeared into a forest from which he never emerged. If Jophar Vorin was a fraud, he invented 2 complete written languages, 5 fictitious continents, and an entire religion, then vanished without a single thread connecting him to any living person on Earth. What kind of impostor builds a world that detailed and then abandons it in the middle of a forest with no audience left to deceive? Conclusion. These 10 cases reveal a pattern that is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Across 3 centuries, spanning 4 continents, individuals have appeared with knowledge, documents, languages, or physical evidence that did not belong to their time or their world. Some carried passports from nations that never existed. Some described technology that would not be invented for decades. Some wrote in languages that no linguist on Earth could identify. And in nearly every case, the same sequence followed. The individual was detained, questioned, documented, and then either vanished without explanation or was absorbed into a narrative designed to make the entire episode disappear. The machinery of suppression operates with remarkable consistency. Rudolph Fentz's case was buried inside a short story, ensuring that anyone who encountered the facts would automatically classify them as fiction. The man from Taured's documents were confiscated and lost from a secure government facility overnight. John Titor's transmissions were traced to a convenient suspect, yet the classified IBM revelation was never addressed. Andrew Carlssin's arrest was attributed to a tabloid invention, but no regulatory body has ever issued a denial. The Moberly-Jourdain account was ridiculed by the academic establishment despite matching unpublished historical records. Goddard's sighting was politely ignored by the military hierarchy that trained him to report exactly what he observed. Bold Street's witnesses were dismissed as victims of imagination, even as their descriptions matched verified historical geography down to the name on a storefront. The Chaplin footage was explained away by a hearing aid theory that cannot account for the movement of the woman's lips. The Gold Bridge photograph was neutralized by isolating each anomalous item and declaring it individually plausible, while ignoring the statistical impossibility of their convergence on a single figure. And Jophar Vorin, the oldest case on record, was simply lost, a man who wrote in unknown languages and named unknown continents, erased from history the moment he stepped into a forest. The pattern is not random. Documents vanish, witnesses disappear, official agencies refuse to confirm or deny. Explanations are offered that address individual details but collapse under the weight of the whole. Every case follows the same architecture. An anomaly surfaces. It is examined just long enough to be categorized. Then it is filed, debunked, ridiculed, or reclassified until public attention moves elsewhere. The event does not get resolved. It gets managed. What has been lost in this process cannot be measured. If even one of these cases represents a genuine breach in the structure of time, then the implications extend far beyond a single traveler or a single displaced object. It means the boundary between past, present, and future is not fixed. It means someone, at some point, has crossed it. And it means that crossing has been systematically concealed from the rest of humanity, not because it failed, but because it worked. The suppression continues. Online archives are quietly edited, news articles are removed without explanation. Researchers who revisit these cases encounter dead links, missing files, and institutions that no longer acknowledge the records they once held. The evidence does not accumulate, it erodes, and with every passing year, the window for verification narrows further. The question was never whether time travel is possible. The question is why every piece of evidence suggesting that it has already occurred is treated not as a discovery to be investigated, but as a threat to be contained. Until the file is opened, every stranger who appears where they should not be will continue to be explained away. And every explanation will be accepted, not because it is sufficient, but because the alternative is too dangerous to consider.